Parents gave my college fund to my brother's business. It failed in 6 months. I joined the military, got free education. Now I make 6 figures. Brother still asks for loans. Parents still wonder why I say no. I never thought I'd be in this situation. How could I have known that the money Grandpa set aside for my education would be handed over to my brother? My brother Brandon. The golden child. The one who could do no wrong, no matter how many times he messed up. I was just the spare. The one who showed up when they needed something fixed or when they needed to guilt trip someone. But it didn't matter. Big plans, I had ambition. I was determined to carve out a life that didn't revolve around his failures. Brandon was always the favorite. Growing up, it was like he was the only child. My parents praised him for every little thing, even for stuff he barely tried. He was on the baseball team, played the bench most of the time, but you'd think he was the next big thing in the majors by how much attention they gave him. I, on the other hand, worked hard to get good grades, but it was never enough. I was the kid who didn't get any recognition. I didn't get the attention. I just got the leftovers. When I was in high school, I had my eyes set on Ohio State. I knew it was my shot. It wasn't just about the degree, it was about escaping the shadow of my brother. I had the grades, I had the work ethic. I had everything I needed to succeed. That's when I learned about the college fund. Dad had left us each $35,000, specifically for college. It was supposed to be our future, but then Brandon came up with his latest scheme, his big business idea. A sports memorabilia store. The same kid who couldn't even hold down a job at the local coffee shop. Yet somehow, my parents bought into it. They didn't even question it. When Brandon told them he needed $70,000 to start, they didn't ask for a business plan or research. They didn't even ask if he was serious. They just said, "Let's use your college fund, Jake. It'll be worth it." I remember standing there at dinner table, my heart sinking. I had plans. Real plans. And they were just throwing them away. My future wasn't worth anything more than a gamble. They told me I could take a gap year, or apply for loans like everyone else. But they didn't care. They didn't care about my future. It was all about Brandon's dream. Just like that, I was forced to watch them throw my future into the trash. All for a business that didn't stand a chance. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I didn't have the power to stop it. At least, not then. So, I did what I could. I joined the military. It was my way out. My way to get what I deserved without relying on anyone else. They thought I was making a mistake. I thought it was my only shot. Now years later with my career in full swing, I still hear the same questions from my parents. Why won't you help your brother, they ask. He's family. Yeah. Family. The same family that stole my future, and handed it to someone who couldn't even get it together. I'm the one with the 6-figure salary now, the one who made it on my own, but somehow I'm still the bad guy. They don't think they'll ever understand why I say no. And honestly, I don't think I care anymore. Growing up, I was always in Brandon's shadow. It wasn't just that he was the oldest. It wasn't even that he was more charismatic. It was that he was the one who got all the attention, all the praise. My parents acted like he could do no wrong, like the sun rose and set around him. They fondled him around like he was destined for greatness, while I was quietly pushed to the side. Brandon could barely manage a C in school, but when he made the baseball team, even if he barely played, it was like he had won the World Series. I remember one particular game where he was on the bench the whole time, but my parents drove 3 hours just to watch him sit there. It was laughable. And yet, they were so proud. I was at home, studying late into the night, getting straight A's. My grades never seemed to matter to them. I was the kid who earned awards that nobody cared about. I remember one year when I got a certificate for making honor roll, and no one even showed up to the ceremony because Brandon had practice. I felt invisible. My parents didn't just overlook my accomplishments. They actively ignored them in favor of Brandon's. It didn't help that he was always getting into trouble. When he wrecked Mom's car while texting and driving, he was grounded for a week. But when I got grounded for 2 weeks, just because I was late to dinner, because I was studying at the library, it felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke. My best friend Carlos could see it too. Had an over, watch my parents fawn over Brandon, and just shake his head. "Man, your family's messed up," he'd say. But what could I do? I was just the spare kid in their eyes, and the system wasn't designed for me to win. Still, I kept my head down. I wasn't going to let their favoritism stop me. I was smart, I had plans, and I was going to escape. But the more I saw Brandon skate by without consequences, the more my resentment built up. It didn't help that Brandon's complete lack of effort seemed to be enough for my parents. They threw money at his problems, while I was left to figure everything out on my own. I could remember the day he got that 800 guitar like it was yesterday. Brank had barely touched a guitar, but my parents bought him that expensive Gibson, with private lessons twice a week. And me, when I asked for help buying textbooks for my AP classes, Dad handed me $20 and told me to make it work. The textbooks cost over $100. It was like my hard work didn't even register. I never got the big ticket items Brandon got. While he got new gloves, bats, and cleats for Christmas, I'd be lucky to get some clothes and maybe a gift card to a bookstore. One year, I got socks, literally. Just socks. Meanwhile, Brandon got a full home gym setup. It was frustrating. He felt like no matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough. But I was still determined. I'd escape. I'd build my own future. The only question was how. Carlos and I spent hours talking about our futures. It was going into his family's construction business, but he had plans of his own. He wanted to study business management, to combine it with his hands-on skills, and eventually start his own company. And me, I wanted to go into engineering. Specifically mechanical engineering. It wasn't just a dream, I had researched the best schools, applied to the ones that offered solid programs I could afford, and was focused on making it happen. Illinois State was a good option, close to home, and their engineering program was solid. It wasn't my first choice, but it was a good one. When I was accepted, it felt like a huge victory. Finally, I had my shot. I could get out. I could do something with my life. But then, Brandon announced he was dropping out of community college to start his own business. He had no plan, no idea what he was doing. Just some vague notion of starting a sports memorabilia shop, because he'd watched a few episodes of Pawn Stars. And at connections with suppliers, people he met on Facebook Marketplace. And he'd found this rundown storefront in a dying strip mall that he was convinced would be the next big thing. And here's the kicker. My parents were all in. They didn't ask questions. They didn't care that he had no experience. They didn't care that his idea was doomed from the start. They just heard business and started thinking about how they could support him. Didn't even consider my future. They were already thinking about giving him the money from my college fund. It wasn't just the fact that they took my money. It was the way they treated it. Like my future didn't matter. Like Brandon's business dream was more important than the future I'd worked for. I had busted my ass, studied late into the night, done everything I could to get into a good school, and it was all being ripped away, just like that. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. I had to get out. I had to make my own way. If that meant joining the military, then that's what I'd do. The moment my parents told me they were taking my college fund and giving it to Brandon's business, I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just sat there. Frozen. No, I said, that's my college fund. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad's face grew serious, the one that always meant the discussion was over. Brandon's business is an investment in the family's future. You can take a gap year, or you can apply for student loans. You'll still get to go to school. I wanted to scream. How could they do this? How could they take the money Grandpa left me for my future and throw it at Brandon's half-baked dream? It's not just any business, Jake. This is real-world experience, Mom added, like that made any sense. I shook my head, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. This was for college. For my future. You can't just take it away because Brandon decided to start a store selling baseball cards and jerseys he doesn't even know how to price. Don't be selfish. Dad snapped. Brandon's trying to make something of himself. This is a family investment. You pitch your money back. And more. More. I couldn't even get them to acknowledge the simple truth. This wasn't about money or family or investment. This was about them wanting to shield Brandon from any real consequences. It wasn't his failure they were worried about. It was the idea that maybe, just maybe, he'd have to face life like the rest of us. Without a safety net. I couldn't look at them anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. This is messed up, I said, my voice shaking with anger I couldn't control. You're stealing my future. I won't be a part of this. Sit down, Dad ordered, his voice stern. We're not finished. But I was. I walked out of the room, my mind racing. They didn't even care. They didn't even get it. I went to my room and slammed the door behind me. My phone buzzed immediately, but I didn't even look at it. Carlos had been texting me, probably already hearing about the disaster that had just unfolded. I needed to get away from it to think. I didn't have time to process it before I grabbed my phone and called him. To giving my money to Brandon. I told him, the anger bubbling over. I don't know what to do anymore. Carlos was quiet for a moment, and when he finally spoke his voice was calm, almost too calm. Man, that's messed up. But you know what? Each their mischoice. It's steak, you don't have to pay for it. I didn't ask for this, I said, frustration rising again. I didn't ask to be the one ignored. I didn't ask for them to treat me like the backup plan, he said softly. But you can't change it. You've got to figure out how to move forward. You're better than this, Jake. You've got to do what's best for you. The conversation ended there, but his words stuck with me. I knew I had to make a choice. If I stayed, I'd be stuck in the same cycle. I couldn't keep waiting for them to wake up, to realize how wrong they were. I couldn't keep letting them dictate my future while they handed my brother everything. The next day, my decision. I was going to join the military. I didn't have another choice. It wasn't just about escaping my family. It was about securing a future that didn't depend on anyone but me. It wasn't the path I dreamed of, but it was the only one left. Aang would be mine. I didn't sleep much the night after the dinner. My mind kept running over what had happened, over the way they'd just taken my future, and handed it over like it was theirs to give. I couldn't understand how they could be so blind. It was like I was invisible to them. My dreams, my hard work, all of it didn't matter because Brandon needed their help. The next morning, I woke up with a sick feeling in my stomach. I knew what I had to do, but it didn't make it easier. I didn't have the luxury of waiting around. I had to make a choice, a real choice, and for once, it wasn't going to be about pleasing them. It wasn't going to be about Brandon's latest, big idea. It was going to be about me. I sat at my desk, staring at the college acceptance letter from Ohio State. It was real. I was in. I had my shot, but my parents had made it clear that shot was gone. $1,000 Grandpa had set aside for me. Gone too. Had feel my frustration building again, but this time I wasn't going to waste it. I knew what I had to do. The military route was suddenly looking like my best option, my only option. Hafan had been in the back of my mind for a while, mostly from conversations with Staff Sergeant Morrison during my time in ROTC. He had mentioned the military as a way to get the education I needed, even pushing me to consider it more seriously. But I'd always thought of it as a backup plan. Something I could do if everything else fell apart. Now when it felt like the only way forward, it wasn't just the military, it was a chance to build something for myself, to escape the mess my family had created. I grabbed my phone and called Morrison. I didn't even wait for him to finish his greeting. Relisting, I said, I'm going to make it work. I need to know how. His voice was steady, supportive. It's a big step, Jake. You sure about this? I paused for a moment. Was I sure? Maybe not completely, but at that point, it didn't matter. Couldn't stay in the same place, spinning my wheels. Yeah, I'm sure. I need to do this. Alright. Well, we'll get the ball rolling. You won't regret it. I hung up, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the college path I'd dreamed of, but it was a path. My path. The idea of getting out of this house, of building my future without relying on my family, finally felt like something I could control. But there was still the issue of my parents. I didn't understand my decision. Not really. They thought I was being hasty, that I was throwing away my future. I didn't care anymore. I didn't need their approval. Later that day they came to me again, as expected. You're making a mistake, my dad said. This is the wrong decision. You should be thinking about your future, not just running away from your problems. Running away. I repeated, incredulous. I'm not running away, I'm making my own way. Oh, to do this on my own, without you guys deciding for me. Mom joined in, her voice soft but insistent. We just don't want you to make a rash decision. You're throwing away everything we've worked for. No, I said firmly. You guys made the decision for me. You took the money that was supposed to be mine and gave it to Brandon. You didn't even care about my future. I'm making sure I have one. A fell silent, my dad looking like he wanted to argue, but realizing he couldn't. I turned and walked out of the room. The conversation was over. It was time for me to take control. I wasn't going to let them stand in my way anymore. The military was my ticket out, and no matter what happened, I was going to take it. I couldn't let my family's dysfunction define me. I was going to prove that I could build something on my own. It wasn't going to be easy, but it would be mine. ASIC training was everything I needed and nothing I expected. It was hard, brutal, and exhausting. The kind of physical challenge that left me feeling sore in places I didn't even know existed. But it was also the structure I craved. Active, finally breathe. The days were long, packed with drills, lessons, and the constant push to do more, do better. But in all of that, there was no favoritism. No second guessing my worth. Just performance. If you did the work, you earned your place. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was earning something. The first few weeks were tough. The long hours, the lack of sleep, the constant demand to be better, faster, stronger, It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. But somehow it clicked. The more I pushed myself, the better I got. I finished a physical fitness test at the top of my class. I shot the highest score on the rifle qualification. I wasn't just keeping up, I was leading. By the time we hit the halfway point, I had found my rhythm. ASIC wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a test of mental strength, of perseverance, and for once I wasn't afraid to be exactly who I was. No one cared about my grades from high school, my family's drama, or my past. It was just me, the task, and my ability to get it done. The training was also a distraction. Every day, I was focused on the here and now, on getting through the drills, on getting my gear ready, on making sure I was improving. I wasn't thinking about Brandon's failed business or my parents' inability to accept the consequences of their decisions. I was moving forward, and that was enough. One day as I was walking back to the barracks after a particularly grueling run, Staff Sergeant Morrison pulled me aside. "You thinking about service after graduation?" he asked, his voice steady, like he already knew the answer. "Maybe," I said, still catching my breath. "I've got to figure out the college thing first." He nodded as if he expected me to say that. "Military could pay for that college. You get real-world experience most kids your age never see. And the GI Bill could cover your whole degree. No debt. That's an opportunity." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like he was speaking directly to the part of me that was still reeling from everything back home. For the first time, the military didn't feel like a fallback. It felt like a chance to get what I deserved, the way I'd always wanted it. On my terms. As I walked back to my bunk, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The military wasn't just a way out, it was a way to get ahead. A way to take control of my future without having to depend on anyone else. It was exactly what I needed. But even as I started to feel more confident in my decision, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that it wasn't just my future I was fighting for. It was something deeper. I was proving to myself, to my family, that I could succeed on my own. Without their expectations, without Brandon's shadow, I still received updates from Carlos about Brandon's business. It wasn't pretty. I could tell that Carlos was trying to be supportive, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice when he described how the store was doing. It was failing, and I knew it. But even so, my parents were still throwing money at it, still trying to save it from collapsing under the weight of their misguided belief in Brandon's potential. I knew the business was doomed. Brandon's great idea had been nothing more than a pipe dream, one that didn't have a chance in hell of succeeding. But it wasn't my problem anymore. I had bigger things to focus on. Things that actually mattered. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was the best decision I could have made. It wasn't just about leaving behind my family's mess. It was about creating something for myself. I wasn't going to let their failures dictate my future. This was my time to rise, to show them, and myself that I could do it. And the more I focused on my future, the less I thought about what they were doing back home. Sure, and I'd heard snippets from Carlos, but it didn't affect me the way it used to. I had made my choice. I was moving forward, and nothing was going to stop me. The months passed, and the more I immersed myself in basic training, the more I realized how far removed I was from the mess that had been my family. I no longer had to watch Brandon's failures unfold. I didn't need to hear about every misguided attempt at entrepreneurship, or every time my parents bailed him out. I was building something solid for myself, and it felt better than I had ever imagined. And the time I finished basic training, Brandon's business had crumbled. I knew it was coming. Carlos kept me updated. The store had barely made any sales. The first month, Brandon maybe $1,000 in revenue, but he had over $3,000 in fixed costs. The second month was worse. No one came to the store. By the third month, they stopped paying rent. The landlord had filed eviction papers, and Brandon was left holding thousands of dollars in worthless inventory. My parents didn't even acknowledge the failure. They kept telling me, "It just needs more time. I'll figure it out." I had no patience for their denial. It didn't matter to me anymore. They had chosen Brandon's dream over mine, and now they had to deal with the fallout. I was free of it. I had my path now. The first few months of my service were like a breath of fresh air. The military was everything I needed. I was learning, growing, and finally getting the recognition I deserved. My superiors praised my work ethic. Running calmly in every task, from physical fitness to marksmanship. It was like every ounce of frustration I had built up over the years was being channeled into something productive. One day, while I was at my new post, I got a letter from Carlos. Each told me how Brandon was spiraling, After the store closed, he bounced from job to job, never sticking around for long. Eventually, he had to move back in with my parents. He was 45, living in the same room he'd had since he was 15, still trying to convince them that his next business idea would work. I laughed when I read the letter. Carlos was worried about Brandon, but I wasn't. Brandon had spent his life coasting, expecting others to fix his problems. He had never learned how to stand on his own, and my parents, they were still enabling him, still making excuses for him. I couldn't do anything about it. I didn't have to be part of it anymore. As the months went on, I found myself thinking less and less about home. My focus was on my training and my career. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I had a clear path ahead of me, and I knew where I was going. My confidence grew every day. The military gave me the discipline and structure I had never gotten at home. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth, I'd already proven it to myself. One night about 6 months into my service, I received a phone call from my mom. It was the first time in months I had heard from her. She told me that my dad had had a stroke. He was stable, but it was serious, there were complications, and was going to need extensive rehabilitation, and it was going to cost a lot of money. Jake, she said, her voice shaky. We were hoping you could help with some of the costs. Your dad's retirement isn't enough, and we don't know how we're going to manage it. I let her words sink in for a moment. It wasn't unexpected. My parents had always been poor at managing money. He had mortgaged their retirement savings to cover Brandon's failed business. Now they were asking me to help them when they had nothing left to give. They had nothing left for themselves, nothing left to offer me. But they had always expected me to give. They had always assumed I would pick up the slack. I can't do that, Mom, I said quietly. I can't fix this for you. You made your choices. I'm not responsible for this. I was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, probably trying to hold back tears. Jake, your father, he raised you. He took care of you. Don't you think you owe him something? The words stung, but I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. No, Mom, I said, my voice firm. I don't owe him anything. You took my future and handed it to Brandon. I'm not going to keep paying for your mistakes. You've never once acknowledged what you took from me. Her silence was deafening. For a moment, I thought maybe she would get it. Maybe she would finally understand how wrong they had been. But instead, she just sighed, sounding defeat. I know what to say, Jake, she whispered. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to say. I had made my choice. I wasn't going to keep letting them take from me, take from my future, just because they couldn't face the consequences of their actions. The conversation ended with an awkward silence and I hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel anything really, except a sense of finality. My family's dysfunction was no longer my burden to bear. I was free of it, and I was never going back. I returned home after basic training, but it wasn't the reunion I'd imagined. My parents were still caught up in their own world, trying to make sense of the wreckage they'd created, while I had moved on. I had done what I needed to do, but they were still stuck in the past, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Lancome was back living at home, as expected. He was 25 now, still drifting from job to job, unable to stick with anything. When I walked into the house, he was sitting on the couch, playing a video game, the kind of mindless activity that had always seemed to define his existence. He barely acknowledged me, which was fine. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an apology. Maybe a sign that he understood how much he'd cost me, how much my parents had cost me. But all I saw was a grown man who was still living in his childhood bedroom, still hoping for some miracle to change his life. It had been years since I'd seen him like this. The last time I was home, I was still hopeful that things could change. I had been naïve. I thought maybe Brandon would get his act together. Maybe my parents would see how much they had hurt me, but none of that had happened. Nothing had changed. He looked up at me finally, barely lifting his eyes from the screen. He said, as if nothing had ever happened, as if I hadn't been robbed of my future, as if I hadn't been forced to start over because of him. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of him. He hadn't changed. Still the same lazy, entitled guy who never took responsibility for anything. You're still at home, I said flatly. Yeah, he replied, shrugging. Still figuring things out. I couldn't believe it. I had spent years trying to build something for myself, struggling to get an education, to build a career, and he was still stuck in the same place, expecting everything to just fall into his lap. My parents were still enabling him too. He'd taken out a home equity line of credit to cover their losses from his failed business, and were using it to support him, while he figured things out. They were stuck in a cycle of denial, unable to face the truth of what they had done. I walked past him without saying anything else. There was nothing left to say. The past was gone, and I couldn't change it. What hurt the most was that they still didn't see what they had done. They never apologized. Never acknowledged how wrong they were. Later that evening, my mom called me into the kitchen. "Jake, we need to talk," she said, her voice softer than usual. I knew what was coming. They needed help. Brandon needed help. Again. I wasn't surprised, but it still hit me like a punch in the gut. "Jake," she started, "your dad's getting older and we've been talking. We're really struggling, and we were hoping you could." "No." I cut her off. "I can't keep doing this. Please," she begged. "Your dad's had some health issues, and with everything that happened with Brandon's business, I don't care about the money anymore," I said, my voice steady but cold. "He took my future to fund his failures. And not doing it again." She looked hurt, but I couldn't be moved. I had been through too much. They had to face the consequences of their actions. I wasn't going to keep enabling this dysfunctional pattern. I had given them enough. And had made their choices, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the apology felt empty. It was just another excuse. "I'm not sorry," I said. "I'm done." I left the kitchen before she could respond. It wasn't that I didn't care about my family. I had given them everything I had for years, trying to get their approval, trying to prove my worth. But now, I realized that the only way I was going to move forward was to stop looking back. And were never going to change. They were stuck in their ways, and I couldn't keep holding myself back because of it. I heard Brandon call my name as I walked upstairs. "Hey man, I just want you to know, I'm sorry for everything that happened." I paused for a moment, then turned around to face him. "You don't get it, Brandon," I said, my voice firm. "You don't understand what you took from me, and you never will." He stood there, looking defeated, but I couldn't feel sorry for him. He had never learned from his mistakes. The business had failed because of his own incompetence, but my parents had shielded him from the consequences. They had never made him take responsibility. And now he was asking for forgiveness, but I wasn't willing to give it. "Not this time. I'm done," I said again, before turning and walking into my room. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of carrying the weight of their mistakes, tired of always being the one to clean up their mess. It was their mess, not mine. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led me here. I am so far since I'd made the decision to join the military. It had given me everything I needed: discipline, focus, a future I could build on my own. It wasn't easy, but nothing about my life had ever been easy. For the first time, I felt like I was finally in control. I made captain at 27, 2 years ahead of schedule. It was an achievement that made me proud, but at the same time, it was a reminder of everything I had sacrificed to get here. Everything I had built for myself, all of it had been earned. And it wasn't just the promotion. It was the years of struggle, of pushing past everything that had been handed to Brandon, of finally standing on my own 2 feet without anyone else deciding what my future should be. The military had given me more than just a career. And had given me a sense of purpose, discipline, and the opportunity to prove that I didn't need anyone to validate me. My family had hit over $100,000 with allowances, but more importantly, I had earned the respect of my peers, and the trust of the people I led. I command a company now, responsible for hundreds of soldiers and millions of dollars in equipment. But that wasn't the most fulfilling part of it. That was the impact we made, the bridges we built, the roads we cleared, the lives we improved that kept me grounded. I had real work to do, work that mattered. Back home, I had heard about Brandon again. His life was still a mess. He had lost his latest job after a few months and was back living with my parents. They were still supporting him, still covering his rent, still bailing him out of his failures. But I had stopped caring. I was done. I was doing well now. And built something. And Brandon, he was still stuck in the same cycle. No one had ever made him face the consequences of his actions, and now he was too old to get away with it anymore. I knew my parents were disappointed, but it didn't matter. They still didn't understand. They still couldn't admit the truth, that their inability to hold Brandon accountable had led to this point. And was like they were still waiting for him to change, even as he wasted away in their basement, expecting things to magically get better. A few years later, my phone rang. It was my mom, a rare call that I had learned to dread. Answered knowing it couldn't be good news. "Jake, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaky. "Your father had a stroke. It's bad. He's stable, but he's going to need a lot of care." The words hit me harder than I expected. My mind raced through the possibilities, but I tried to stay calm. "How bad is it?" It's serious, she said. He's gonna need rehabilitation. We don't know how we're going to afford it. I felt a cold rush of anger. I knew what was coming next. We're hoping you could help, she added, her voice soft. You're in a good place now. You could. No, I interrupted. I can't. I'm not doing this, Jake. Please. She pleaded. Your father raised you. He took care of you. He needs you now. I caused the weight of her words sinking in. No, Mom, he didn't raise me. Not the way I needed. You took my college fund, gave it to Brandon's stupid business, and now you want me to pay for the consequences of that. You're asking me to fix something that's not mine to fix. There was silence on the other end, a long heavy pause. She didn't say anything. I knew she didn't understand. They never did. Jake, she finally said, your dad's not the same. He's been through a lot. I took a deep breath trying to steady myself. You've done this your whole life, Mom. You've enabled him. You've enabled Brandon. And now you want me to fix it. I can't. She didn't respond. I hung up before she could say anything more. The next few days were tense, and I avoided any further contact with my parents. They were still caught in the same web they had spun around themselves. They couldn't face their mistakes. They admit that they had ruined everything for me just to make Brandon feel like he was special. But I was done. A few months later, Brandon called me. I almost didn't answer. But something inside me told me I had to. He said, his voice heavy. I get why you won't help. I've screwed up, I know I have, but I didn't get it before. I thought I could fix everything on my own, but I couldn't. I'm sorry, man. For everything. His apology was long overdue, but I wasn't sure how to take it. He'd never really taken responsibility for anything before. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to normal. I said, you took something from me, Brandon. Hey, Mom and Dad, you don't get to undo that. I know, he said quietly. I get it now. I should have never asked you for anything. I should have never let them do that to you. I sat in silence for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. I understood now, but it was too late. I had moved on, and the past wasn't something I could change. I've made my peace with it. I said finally. I'm not angry anymore. But I can't fix your life for you. You're gonna have to do that on your own. Yeah, he said. I know. That was the last time we spoke. Maybe he really had changed, but it didn't matter to me anymore. And my life to live, my own future to build, and I wasn't going to waste it trying to fix someone else's mistakes. I married Rebecca a year later. The ceremony was small, held at the chapel on Fort Bragg. My parents didn't come. He said they couldn't afford the travel, but I knew it was because of the tension between us. It didn't matter. Rebecca's family was there, and they welcomed me as one of their own. That was enough for me. Life moved forward. Uncle Rear continued to climb, and at 30, I made lieutenant colonel. I had everything I'd worked for: a successful career, a stable home, a wife I loved, and a future I had earned on my own terms. Renan's life, on the other hand, remained stagnant. He had filed for bankruptcy and was still living with my parents. They were still supporting him, just like they always had. But I was no longer a part of it. I had cut ties with that world, and I had no intention of going back. 2 years later, I received another call from my mom. This time, it was about my father's health again. They needed money, but I had made up my mind long ago. I wasn't gonna fix their problems anymore. I had already paid my dues. Jake, she said, her voice breaking, please, we need help. Your dad's in bad shape. We can't do this on our own. I'm sorry, I said, steady but firm. You did this to yourselves. You took from me, and now you're asking me to fix it. That's not how this works. I hung up and didn't look back. That part of my life was over. I had built everything I needed. I was successful, happy, and at peace with who I had become. As for them, they were still stuck, still repeating the same mistakes, still asking for help they didn't deserve. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Had my own family to take care of, my own future to build. I had earned everything I had. And that was enough.